So hello, I'm Tyler Leistash, and today I have the honor of interviewing Mr. Robert Anderson, a World War II veteran, at his home in Stewart's Draft, Virginia, on Monday, June 22nd, 2015. So, Mr. Anderson, could you give me your full name?
I'm Robert David Anderson.
And what's your date of birth?
I was born November the 22nd, 1925.
And what was your highest rank achieved?
I was discharged as a staff sergeant
Okay, thank you, sir. So, where were you born?
in a small coal mining town called Dante, D-A-N-T-E, in southwestern Virginia, in Russell County.
And was your family always from Dant?
No. And the fact of the matter is, at one time during my service, I was transferred to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to attend the Adjutant General School, where my father had been during World War I as a medical, not an officer, but just an enlisted man. And while there, he met my mother, who was a nurse, and they both then eventually returned to Dante, Virginia, where my mother was the administrator and head nurse in a small hospital there, owned and operated by the Clinchfield Coal Corporation. And my father became the chief accounting officer for the Clinchfield Coal Corporation. Mm-hmm. And so we lived in several places in Dante over a period of years, moving from one home to another. And actually my father and my elder brother, myself, lived in the Clinchfield Inn, which was a beautiful old hotel, wooden hotel, built by the Clinchfield Coal Corporation for visitors that came through that little town, whose population was listed, I think, in the 1930 census as 4,080 people. So it was a small coal mining town, built on coal, sustained on coal. Everybody worked for the corporation. It was one of those situations Johnny Cash would have called where you owe your soul to the company store. And that was basically the truth for most people, because you didn't do anything. There was nothing much to do. There was little of anything going on. And we had a nice theater and a couple of office buildings, the Clinchfield Inn, the hospital, a bank which went bankrupt, and during the Depression my father lost everything that he had except a small farm that he had bought. He was an old country boy from Grayson County, Virginia. Mm-hmm. My father had bought this small farm near Abingdon, actually between Abingdon and Bristol, on what we call the Bristol Highway, actually Route 11 in Virginia. And my mother died while there. My age was about 5 or 6 at the time, and my brother, being about 2 or 3 years older than I am, would have been 8 or 9, I guess. And so we eventually moved back to Dante and lived at the Clinchfield Inn for a number of years until my brother and I both went off to college. It was a wonderful life in many ways, but we didn't know that we were so bad off.
So while you were in Dante, you went to high school, I assume.
Yes.
What else would you do in your free time?
Well, there was not much to do. Actually, as a young boy, I spent a lot of time in the mountains and the woods. This little place formerly called Turkey Foot, because of the way all the hollers were. The town was built in Squirrel Holler, Straight Holler, Bear Waller, several other hollers that would look about your hand fingers, and because the creeks ran this way, mm-hmm. and they all eventually turned into one one creek which was called Lick Creek, and that was used to wash the coal from the coal mines, and it was black as tar, and nothing could live in it, and then it eventually poured into the Clinch River down near St. Paul, Virginia. But my life was spent largely in the mountains there, but you could have to look up to see out because they were quite steep and high, and I would frequently take a neighbor's dog or whoever I could find to go and play in the mountains and explore and find all kinds of good things going on, and a lot of things you could eat, berries and so forth. And that was about my life until the Boy Scouts took over, and I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout, eventually achieved the rank of Eagle Scout and the great honor belonging to the Order of the Arrow, which was about as high as you could go in scouting. But the scouting really was my life, and I think changed my life in many, many ways. And the scoutmaster, Mr. Thompson, probably was one of the most influential men in the whole town. But he and the scouts and the Deaconess Booth, or Deaconesses, Booth and Williams and several other deaconesses in the Episcopal Church were the biggest influences on my life besides some of my teachers at school. Mm-hmm. And I think they made such an impression on me, and I guess in many respects made me a good boy, but nothing I could brag about.
Did you work any jobs while you were there?
I eventually went into pharmacy after going to the School of Pharmacy at the Medical College of Virginia. And what got me interested in pharmacy was working as a soda jerk in the little drugstore there. And Doc Hall was the pharmacist there at the time, and he gave me a job as a soda jerk working in the pharmacy there and the company store, and where I could watch him as he compounded his medications in the back, and I was working, filling Cokes and making Sundays and things of that sort, and that's what really got me started in a over 60-year career in hospital pharmacy of some significance, I think, but you may get into that later.
Mm-hmm. And so, being a younger man when the war began, you were still at home in the early parts of the war.
I was at the School of Pharmacy in Richmond, Virginia at the time.
So what was that like, finding out America was at war?
Oh, I can remember quite well. We had one radio. Of course, there was no such thing as television or much of any other way of communicating out from where we were to the rest of the world. I did sell newspapers for the Roanoke Times for a few years, and that was one way to get out and understand what was going on in the world. But my father had been given a radio, the first radio we ever had, by a doctor friend of both my father and my mother, and he gave my dad a radio, an old Philco, I believe, it was about yay big, and I can remember very well hearing about the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Of course, we had known about the Germans and the Nazi Party and what it was doing all over Europe, so that was pretty well known to us, but nothing really of great concern until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And many of my friends in high school joined the Navy immediately. Army wasn't very popular. It seemed to me that no one wanted to be in the Army. Everybody wanted to go either in the Navy or in the Air Force. But as it turned out, I got
before being drafted, did you notice any changes in America from when the war began to when you were drafted?
Well, yeah, primarily, I guess, because of rationing of everything. You couldn't buy sugar, you couldn't buy butter, you couldn't get much of anything if you didn't have your ration cards. And the same applied way down there in the mountains in the company store again. If you didn't have your ration cards, and coal, of course, was this whole center of the community. And everybody worked for the Clinchfield Coal Corporation, and of course, coal became much more important in the defense industry and for smelting iron, I guess, and making steel and so forth. Everything from tanks to ships and guns and other forms of munitions. And one thing that really struck me most was that you couldn't buy tires for automobiles, and you couldn't. Gas was very difficult to obtain. I don't remember ever seeing any lines as we had later on in life, but gas was often difficult to obtain. And bus service, for example, it almost fell apart because you couldn't get tires or gasoline, and we didn't have any such thing like Greyhound bus or something that didn't come up into the mountains like that. We'd have to go to Abingdon or Bristol or someplace to catch a train or to utilize a bus service, the Greyhound bus. And of course, even train service was quite limited, and passenger service just seemed to kind of fall apart to me. That we had the Clinchfield Railroad that ran through Dant, and certainly was provided one of our major outreaches from Dant to the rest of the world through the Clinchfield Railroad, which was not owned by the coal company. Mm-hmm. It was a separate entity in its own. But we would look forward to the arrival of the passenger train every evening, and I would always be there to wait for the train to come in, and they'd unload a service car of some kind with all kinds of goods for the company store and the post office, and the mail came in on that train, and we had to cart all the mail from the train station up to Main Street, which was about maybe a couple 100 yards long, on a big cart or wagon to the post office. And everybody volunteered to help out in those days. Even though you didn't work for the post office, it got done by volunteers to get that sort of thing done. So I guess that...
At any point before you were drafted, did you consider enlisting?
Well, I guess I was only 18 or 19 at the time, 1941, so I was born in 25. So I would have been 16, I guess, when the war started. And I was too young to be even considered for the draft at the time, although everyone had to register, even at my age, as I recall. I'm not sure when that really became a requirement. But you knew that you were going to be drafted eventually if you didn't manage to avoid it somehow or other. And I did avoid it by going off to college, which was not the intention. I didn't want to avoid it, and I felt like I really would eventually hopefully again to get in either the Air Force or the Navy if I could. But off to school in the draft board located in Lebanon, Virginia, the county seat of Russell County. Apparently did not feel it was necessary to take me at that young age, and especially since I went to the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond, And I'm sure that the dean and the faculty there had something to do with encouraging the draft board to.
So were you drafted as soon as you were done with college?
Well, no, I was I was almost finished with the third year of the third of the 4-year program in the School of Pharmacy under an accelerated program. We normally would have graduated in 4 years, but under the accelerated program, we had no vacations, and we were expected to graduate in 3 years instead of 4, because pharmacists were in short supply. Almost everyone in my upper classes were taken into the Navy or the Air Force or whatever almost immediately after the war started. So even my class at the College of Pharmacy was very, very small, one of the smallest they'd ever had, I think. And we also began seeing young women being admitted to the School of Pharmacy. And so the board, I guess, just waited until the draft said, well, we just need more people. And so they took me out of the School of Pharmacy when I had finished just about 2/3 of the third year. And again, I was only probably 19 and a half, I suppose, at the time. I reported to Broad Street Station in Richmond and got the usual short arm inspection, all the shots and so forth that you're required to have. And off to Fort Meade, Maryland, and from there to Camp Croft, South Carolina, where I began basic training.
And what was that training like?
Hard.
You can keep going. So by hard, what do you mean?
Well, all the sit-ups and the marching and the post-order drill and all of that stuff, And with a tough sergeant who ran the ship pretty well, and you had to do KP and peel 10,000 potatoes in a day or something.
10,000 potatoes?
I don't know that number exactly, but seemed like about 3 of these huge bags of potatoes. And of course, you'd get latrine duty, but a lot of the times there was just sit-ups and calisthenics and all kinds of things out in the dust and the heat. It was Camp Croft. Well, let's see, I was drafted in August, so it was still pretty hot when we ended up at Camp Croft. And
was it difficult to make that transition from private sector life to the military?
Well, I didn't consider it very difficult. It was certainly different and difficult and a change from what I was used to. And now you're walking everywhere, 15, 20, 25-mile hikes and things of that sort with a full pack and a M1 carbine and your digging tools and so forth, and it was really tough. And I've always remembered that one of the big men in my training platoon seemed like he was twice as big or twice the size that I was, but he was asked to carry a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, which was probably twice the size of an M1 rifle. And on one of our 25-mile hikes, he just gave out. And I ended up carrying my rifle and his BAR. And I really was thin as I am now. I probably didn't weigh 140 pounds at the most. But I was in good physical condition, and so I carried his stuff as well as my own. And the same thing occurred as we crossed the Atlantic, which we'll probably get to later. You had to carry somebody else's stuff or another soldier's stuff to re-equip somebody in Europe. But I felt like I was in pretty good shape, and I really enjoyed. I would have to say, really, that I did enjoy my basic training. I never felt it to be a real burden or difficult.
So you were a radio operator when you served. So when did you get assigned that specific role?
Well, that's another sort of an interesting thing, I believe. I joined my company in Saarlautern, S-A-A-R, Lautern, L-A-U-T-E-R-N, Saarlautern, Germany, in early January 1944. And we had been brought there from Metz, Germany, where we had come from Le Havre, France to Metz on these rickety old 40 and 8 boxcars, and we were housed for one night and possibly another day, maybe 2 nights, I don't remember for sure, in this really fancy, beautiful, beautiful horse barn, all tile and just beautiful tile, almost like the kind of tile you'd find in your mother's main crystal and all, and service. And then we were trucked from Metz to Saarlautern in the middle of the night to this old house that had been bombed, and there was nothing left in that city, hardly anything left. In the middle of the night, we unloaded and are told to climb the steps up the upstairs room, which they were under blackout, I guess, because there was no lights of any kind except maybe a candle or two. And Captain Sanderson was Company L commander, and he and Sergeant Zant, First Sergeant Zant, Z-A-N-T, and the executive officer were sitting at a table interviewing all these new recruits had come in. The company and the division and the regiment had all suffered almost 100% casualties during their fighting at Metz and then along the Saar River. But they, I guess, were required to interview every one of the new recruits to take the place of all those men that had been killed or wounded. And so my turn came. I stepped up to he was sitting behind a little counter on a stool or a box, I guess, and I stepped up and gave him a real snappy salute, the best I could possibly do. Snapped at attention, gave him a salute, and said, "Private Robert David Anderson reporting for duty, sir, as directed," something to that effect. And he hadn't been saluted in so long, I thought he was about to fall off his stool, because you don't salute officers out in the open. I didn't know that, of course. And of course, they could look at my service record, what little I had from basic training, and see that I could also type. I'd taken typing in high school, and I was pretty good. I think 40 words a minute or something like that, which wasn't bad for those days. And so he and the first sergeant got their heads together for just a few minutes and decided they'd better keep this guy in the headquarters platoon. Other guys went to the rifle platoons. Might have saved my life for all I know, but anyhow, I was lucky to get in the headquarters platoon because we always got the best houses whenever we took a town or something like that. And other guys would often at times have to sleep out in the field or in the pup tent while we got sleeping beds, and in some cases we'd even have running water or electricity. And so I was really lucky to be able to do that. And then I was given to the communications sergeant, Sergeant DeGroat, who was supposed to teach me to know what I needed to know about radios and laying wire and that sort of thing. We'd had none of that in basic training. I'd never seen one of these SCR 300 radios, which you carry on your back. It's about like this, with a handset that you could talk to battalion or regiment and so forth. I'd never seen or touched one of them before, and I had about 15 minutes, I guess, at the most, Sergeant DeGroat spent with me to tell me what I was supposed to do, but I never really knew. And I could tell you another story. I think I really delayed an attack because I couldn't get the radio to work. And finally I had to get a Jeep, and the sergeant and myself went back to the battalion headquarters of the communication to get another radio. Got back to there, and the sergeant of the battalion says, "Well, you dummy, you had the squelch on all the time." I didn't know, and even know what the squelch was. Had no idea what it was or why I hadn't been able to make the thing work. Because probably shouldn't say this, but Sergeant DeGroat was most interested in finding how many girls he could sleep with. That was his main function, and not to teach me or the other fellows who were in his squad how to do what we were supposed to do. Forgive me, Sergeant DeGroat, I don't think you're still living.
So were all the radio men not very well trained?
Well, the other guy, we had two of us, and the other guy who I subsequently met after we got out of the service, and he had been fairly well trained. He knew his stuff, but I didn't. I had no idea what to do with this thing. One of our battles, we approached the line in the middle of the night. It was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And we were told to go ahead and attack this hill and take the town on the other side, or at least the top of the hill, so we could look down on the town on the other side of this hill or mountain. And Captain Sanderson said, "You hold on to my belt, you do not let go under any circumstances." Because you can't lose the SCR. It's the only communication we'd have with battalion and regiment and artillery, or the forward observers and these little Cub airplanes and so forth. And so we started out, but finally somebody up in, I guess, battalion says, "Well, it's just too dark." And of course the bullets were flying like mayflies at night, just thousands of tracer bullets, just like this. And if they'd been able to see us enough to lower their sights just a little bit, we could have been torn to pieces. But next day we did take that hillside, and we found most of our opposition were young boys, 12, 15 years of age, and old men. And but I still held on to Captain Sanderson's belt and never let go of him until we completed the operation and took the hill. And I might say that one of the most depressing things I ever saw was some young kid been struck, and his jaw had been torn off, and he was just sitting there with his rifle in his lap, I guess, and he was just sitting there pawing the air, and well, he couldn't scream, he couldn't yell, he couldn't say anything because his jaw was and eventually I understood later that somebody from one of the rifle platoons came back and put a bullet in his head to reserve his, or to prevent any further any further misery, and killed him on the spot. And that's the kind of stuff that really struck me at the time, of how cruel man can be. Although I think the sergeant, or the soldier who killed him, probably did the right thing, because he couldn't have been saved, and he must have been in terrible pain to have had his jaw blown off like that. And just a young kid. I think no more than 12 or 15. Part of the Hitler Youth. And that's about the end of that story. Then we went on the next day and we took the town called Erlinghausen, Oerlinghausen, Erlinghausen, I believe it was. And again, the headquarters platoon took the mayor's house, really the nicest town in town. And of course everybody was looting, which was against the rules, and I was looting everything I could find, but didn't find anything. Either whiskey or, and I didn't drink, food of any kind, but we did have, for some reason, electricity, lights, and running water in that house. So another big advantage of being with the headquarters platoon, we got the very best there was. Well, the other poor guys had to sleep outside again, or in their pup tents or on the ground.
Were there any other combat experiences while you were overseas?
Oh yeah, it was constant almost. Well, I should say before that, we moved from Charlotte through Bastogne up through Belgium into Holland, where we backed up the British Second Army at Nijmegen Bridgehead. And one thing that struck me there the most was this would have been in mid to late January of '44. And we had a nice day one day in Holland, and you could still see the windmills turning, and a few flowers were beginning to show up, the tulips I guess, but nothing like you see in the commercials these days, where there are thousands or millions of tulips being grown commercially. But we'd begin to see some sprouting of even flowers like that. And I can remember lying out in a field one day on my back in the grass, looking up, and the sky was literally black with B-24s and B-17s and some British bombers and so forth, heading east. I don't know where, but probably heading for the oil fields or some industrial city somewhere that they needed to bomb. And the sky was literally black. You couldn't even see that at all, anything but all these planes passing over. And it's just, you couldn't help but wonder what kind of devastation they were going to be dropping on some city like they did to Dresden, and certainly all of those industrial cities in the Ruhr. But you're talking about other battles. At this time, the Germans were giving up mass, wholesale, division after division, just giving up. They'd run out of ammunition, they'd run out of equipment, and so forth. And so we were capturing a lot of them without much of a battle or trouble, difficulty at all. And but there were certain situations where there were opposition that would creep up, and we'd have to go in and take the town. Again, it would be largely young men and old men, and probably even some women for that matter. And we didn't have much in the way of difficulty with those situations at all. And we kept moving up after crossing the Rhine River over a pontoon bridge. It was just moving day after day, on the trucks, off the trucks, do what little battle you had, get back on the trucks, take off again, capture another 100 or 200 people who were giving up, had their hands raised or behind their heads like that. Maybe the one or two soldiers guarding the thousands, if not thousands, of Germans who were just completely exhausted, tired, worn out, no fight left in them, whatever. And yet they could have been a formidable force had they had the equipment and so forth that we might have expected from them. But there was little or no opposition whatever. I can recall getting up to the Rhine, right across the Rhine River from Cologne, and you see the cathedral there in Cologne still standing, not damaged at all, except it looked like maybe from rifle fire or something like that. It pockmarked pretty badly, but the rest of the city was completely devastated. Nothing left, nothing standing that I could see. And we eventually crossed on this pontoon bridge, and I have a picture in some of my stuff of General Patton. We were serving with General Simpson in the 9th Army at the time. We had been with Patton before, but I have a picture in some of my memorabilia here of Patton peeing in the Rhine River, which was a major focus for him. He wanted to do that, and apparently had expressed his desire to pee in the Rhine River more than anything else.
Did you see this event?
No, I didn't see that, but there's pictures of him on a pontoon bridge like that, peeing in the river, showing his distaste for the Germans, I guess, and the Rhine, which seems to emphasize the Germany anyhow as the major river in the whole place, the whole country. And
when did you run into that Panzer tank?
I don't know. I have no idea when it was.
Would you like to share that story?
Even where it was. Well, we were just out on a march one day, moving forward, I guess. I didn't know forward from backward because you didn't know. One day that somebody else had, I guess, been told by battalion or regiment or division which you needed to do, and so the captain and the officers were leading us forward to try to do what we were supposed to do. And we came not even into a little village. It was just a farm somewhere out in the countryside, and a Panzer tank just showed up out of nowhere. It might have been in some adjoining woods, and just came out and pointed that 88 millimeter rifle or tank gun at us. And you could see that you were looking right down the muzzle of that thing, and you know if he fired, if somebody's going to be hurt badly, definitely killed. And one thing that struck me at the time was that one of our BAR men carried a Browning automatic rifle, which was the biggest thing we had next to a machine gun. And this guy was huge. He must have weighed a minimum of 300 pounds, but just a big man. And we were all so scared that this thing's going to start shooting at us, if not the cannon. Certainly they had machine guns on the turret of these tanks. They were dangerous machines. And this BAR man took off running over to join some of us on the other side of this little rise in the landscape where we'd all be temporarily safe. And he didn't even stop for a fence. He ran right through this fence and just knocked it down without stopping. And that's another thing that I'll always remember. It seemed so comical at the time that he was able to do that. He was a big man, but he was really moving. He knocked down the fence in the process. And then apparently an American tank had been searching for this Panzer, I guess. I don't know that, and never had any contact with the officers and crew in the tank, but one of our tanks came up, apparently looking for and chasing the Panzer. The Panzer took off, and then quite a few of us from Company L and jumped on the American tank and started to follow to get this guy. Somebody took after him with a bazooka, but wasn't able to do anything. And so I would guess there were probably 10 or 12 of us jumped up on this American tank and took off after the Panzer, but just almost immediately the American tank ran over an anti-tank mine, blew the tracks off the tank, brought it to a complete stop. But the interesting part again was that one of our soldiers who was standing right above where the mine went off, his helmet went flying through the air, straight up. I would guess it was 30, 40 feet probably. Had our American soldier not had his strap, or if he had had his helmet strap latched and tight, probably would have broken his neck as his helmet went off. But we even lost sight of the Panzer at that time, and I don't know whatever happened to it. I'm sure somebody got it eventually. But it was just another funny experience. Didn't have much to do with winning the war at all, but just a fun experience.
Did your headquarters platoon, did they ever take casualties while you were there?
Oh, well, on this one battle over that town of Erlinghausen, where we were trying to take that in the middle of the night, one of our men was killed there, but I didn't recall any other casualties while I was with them.
So you spoke about how the German troops looked exhausted and just done with the war. But while you were occupying the German towns, how did the civilians look, and how did those interactions work?
Well, most of them just disappeared. There were no men of fighting age or ability. In most of the cases, they'd all been, like me, they'd all been drafted into the German army. And they were away in the service and working to kill us as we were working to kill them. And so there was nothing much left except, again, old men, young children, and women, most of whom were down in their bunkers or the cellars in their homes, just trying to stay alive. We did capture one large displaced persons camp. Were mostly, I think, were Poles, Hungarians, maybe some Russians.
Do you remember the name of this camp?
No, I don't have it.
Was it in Austria?
No, it was
it in Germany?
Well, you have to recognize the Ruhr pocket was the main industrial part of the German economy. All the major plants for producing warfare equipment were in the Ruhr areas. Places like Cologne, Bochum, Bostrop, and I forget the other names. But they were nothing but rubble anymore. As we passed through, we had to walk through all this, and it's just crumpled steel in many cases, until you could get to some place where the trucks and tanks and so forth could make it onto the road, and you could get on again and take off chasing the Germans again. But you didn't see very many civilians except the old men and the women and the children.
Well, so let's go back to this displaced persons camp. What was that like?
I have no idea how many were in it, but I would assume there were probably thousands, probably 10, 15,000 people.
What were their conditions?
Terrible, just like you can almost see from the Holocaust. These men had been worked to death. They were skin and bones, nothing much left of them at all. And they had a vicious determination to get out and take revenge on the German population, whoever was left, which would be mostly women and old men again. And so some of them did manage to escape, even though our role was to try to to keep them confined until they could be treated and fed and taken care of and so forth. But some of them would escape and try to take their revenge. And
How did seeing a camp like that affect the morale and the mentality of the soldiers?
of the American soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
well, it certainly made you realize right on the spot. It wasn't like the extermination camps. Of course, these people were workers. They were just being worked to death. And I guess their living conditions were very similar to those who were being the Jews who were being killed in the camps. And they had probably nothing to sleep on but boarded up places that they could crawl into, and little or no food was coming their way at all. They were looked like they were starving to death, and it was just a really sad situation and a very sad life for them, and for those of us who just were living on the plenty it seemed like compared, even though we were largely eating K rations and C rations, even though we did have our company cook, a young Chinese fellow named Young Joe is his name, and he could prepare a pretty good meal for us with rations provided by the Army, but many of these people had absolutely nothing. And we were fortunate to have C rations and K rations, even though they were not very palatable. And once you didn't care for, and oftentimes people just threw them away because you just didn't like them that much. But these people would have killed for any one of them, I guess, if they could get a hold of them.
Did witnessing these displaced persons, this camp, did that change how you thought about the war and how you thought about the Germans?
Yeah, you realize very easily how ruthless they were to treat people like this, and the inhumanity of man. And that's not my own wording. It's something that I've heard about ever since the war, and especially after learning about the Holocaust and the camps and so forth. The inhumanity of man. How in the world could a highly developed civilization like the German people at that time, how in the world could they have knowingly been willing to treat people like they were treating these displaced persons? And of course, we did find out, not much later, that about the Holocaust and the killing fields, and how so many people were being burned alive, gassed alive. It just made you realize how in the world can man be so vicious? We are supposed to be a civilized society, and yet this sort of thing was going on. Men, women, and children all being killed wholesale, and their bodies dumped, just like cordwood or wood or trash anywhere else. You know, I've been church related all my life, but this really made me understand that Jesus would never have accepted anything like this, and how could I, as a Christian follower of Christ, been involved in something like that? And yet many of the Germans say they didn't know anything about it. Everybody must have known about it, especially in and around the camps, Buchenwald and so forth.
After the camp, where did you and the regiment go?
Well, we became occupation forces, and I guess one thing that stands out in my mind, again, I don't know the name of the town, but another place that we occupied, and spent probably a week or two in this one town, just trying to keep. And this would have been right about the time that the war was about to end. And I had nothing to do. We were just being there to try to keep order, I guess, more than anything else. There was no fighting going on. One day I got a little bit perturbed that I didn't have anything to do. I was just restless and decided to just sort of take off on my own in this nice town. We had occupied the central square in the town and a small hotel-like arrangement with a big bar on the first floor. Really a nice place. And again, we all, especially in the headquarters platoon, we all had nice beds, and again, we had some electricity. I don't think we ever found any more beer or wine or anything else in this former bar. But on this particular day, I decided, well, I'd just like to get out and roam around a little bit and see what this place is like. And I passed down the street and saw what looked like maybe a school or something. I didn't know what it was. And the front door was open. And I walked in and roamed around down on the first floor and noticed this one door that had been nailed shut, but not very securely. And I thought, what in the heck is on the other side of this door, and why would it be open and unlocked? And I kicked it down and looked in, and there was a big pile, huge pile, bigger than this carpet here. It was covered with German weapons, everything from sabers and swords to knives and pistols, machine guns, and all that stuff just piled on this floor and covered with a tarp of some kind. And I realized right away that this shouldn't be there. And so I hightailed it back to the company headquarters and got the Captain Sanderson and Sergeant Zant and the executive officer, I guess, and told them what I'd found, and so they all came running back to see what this was and realized that this was something that they were hiding to try to utilize against us at some point in time. And Captain Sanderson called the mayor on the block and read the riot act to him, and this guy, he could have been charged and killed on the spot, I think, because the rule was that it made very clear to him before that every weapon had to be turned in. And to keep stuff like this, obviously they would be used to attack the American forces somewhere, either us or somebody to follow. And I found I didn't get much out of that, but of course many of the American soldiers looted it themselves. But I did get two real nice German sabers with scabbards and at least one large German flag with a swastika, which I was going to keep for myself. And I guess I must have felt like I deserved it since I found it all. And I did carry those for the rest of my remaining time in Germany, and eventually sold it, I think. Oh, one other thing I found is very interesting over and under pistol. It had, I believe, a .22 rifle chamber and another looked like maybe a .32 or something like that in a pistol. Two different chambers, different sized bullets. And I found one of those. No Lugers. Everybody wanted a Luger, but I couldn't find any of those. So I sold them on the way back across the Atlantic, coming from back to Le Havre, Germany, back to the USA at Virginia Beach. It was constant gambling. Everybody on board ship was gambling for anything that was of any worth. Card games, crap games, and all of that. And I sold them, and I can't have any idea how much I got for them. But I sold most of that to some of these guys who needed something else to gamble about.
Do you remember, before you went home, do you remember how it felt to find out that the war was over in Europe?
Well, that was another situation I've never forgotten. We had moved on up again. I guess we were somewhere in Germany, and I don't remember where now. I have no idea, and I don't think I have any idea in any of my records that I've tried to keep in trying to remember where I had been. But we had occupied another nice home, wherever this was, and was sitting out on the front stoop one morning, and the word came that Franklin D. Roosevelt had died. And I would have to admit that it really struck me, and I even cried quite a few tears knowing that Roosevelt had died, because he had been the leader of the free world along with what's his name from England?
Churchill.
Churchill. And so it was not long after that the war was over. And I don't recall really that there was any great celebration when we heard that.
Because it had been a long time coming. You guys knew the war was coming to an end.
Well, yeah, it couldn't last much longer. But I don't think there was any great celebration when we heard that the peace treaty had been signed. We just accepted it, I guess, as a foregone conclusion. It was bound to happen.
Did you and your unit worry about being sent to Japan?
Well, that's another aspect of it that I have great interest in, because we were the 2nd Division back from the European theater to the U.S. I guess we were one of the younger divisions as well, and had our combat, even though we had 100% casualty throughout the division, we still didn't suffer like the 82nd Airborne or the 101st and some of those guys in the Battle of the Bulge and some of the other major battles, and certainly like D-Day on the beaches, Normandy and so forth. And so our role was considerably limited compared to some of those other situations. And I could go on and tell you about some of the other heroics that our company even experienced, even though I was not a part of it at the time. But Lieutenant Albano, A-L-B-A-N-O, had such a tremendous effort that he displayed in the battle for Metz and what they call the slag pile. And he should have gotten a Medal of Honor for his time there. I don't have any doubt about it. But he was just passed over and never given the medal, as I think he should have. He killed dozens upon dozens of Germans, and almost all by himself. And very few soldiers accomplished what he did at all. But anyhow, we were the 2nd Division back, and we got back on the 40 and 8s and back to Le Havre, and eventually on board ship whose name I can't remember right offhand.
That's fine.
But when we saw the beaches of Virginia Beach on the horizon, that was quite almost an uprising there. We're home at last. And we knew that we were probably going to be heading to Japan eventually. And as it turned out, we had a 30-day delay en route, so I could get on the train and go right back to Dant, Virginia on the Clinchfield Railroad and get home like that. And from there...
What was it like going home for the first time?
Certainly was not like the Vietnamese returning veterans who were practically spit on, and people, and I didn't involve or wasn't involved in anything like that at all. But apparently, those men came back from Vietnam at a terrible, terrible housecoming or homecoming. I just showed up on the train, nobody there, no flags waving, nobody expected me, knew I was coming at all. And there might have been some, I don't remember seeing any other men on the same train. Certainly no one that I knew or spoke to. And I get off the train and walk up to the Clinchfield Inn. And I don't think that my father even hugged me. We were not a hugging pair back in those days. And very few, if anyone, expected me or showed any great interest in what I'd been, what I'd done, or where I'd been, and that sort of thing. But everybody eventually that I saw was quite interested, but that first day of homecoming was not what I might have expected, I guess. But I never felt bad about it. Didn't feel like I had been ignored or anything of that sort. But it was just great to be home. And never had a girlfriend, not once. Never dated in high school. Didn't know anybody. Well, I of course knew all my classmates, quite a few women, young ladies in my class, but wouldn't have made much difference to them if I'd been killed or not, I don't think. Well, we did have quite a few casualties from the Dant population, men in the Navy and the Army, Air Force and so forth, who had given their all. And here I was still just a PFC, I guess. I was still a PFC. And then we were supposed to, we had this 30-day delay en route, where I was supposed to report to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, for additional training, re-equipping to go to Japan. And while there, we were told our advance party had already left. We're located in Hawaii, and our beachhead on the main island of Japan had already been assigned to the 95th Division. And we would have landed on those beaches. We would have been wholesale murder. Probably very few people, worse than D-Day, I suppose, would have survived it. Because the whole Japanese nation would have been there to fight us off, women and children. And but as it turned out, they dropped the bomb, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and killed thousands upon thousands of Japanese. And it became quite an event when the country learned that the 95th and I guess others were scheduled to head on for this invasion, continuation of the war, which everybody was tired of, I think. And one major news person, I can't think of his name now, somebody like Gabriel Heater or one of the famous newsmen of the day, sort of took it upon himself to raise the cry of condemnation. These men have been, along with their buddies and colleagues, and many who had died in Europe, don't deserve to have to go to Japan now. There were other forces in this country who ought to go first. Something to that order. And so there were attempts to convince Congress not to come to our rescue, not to send us. And as it turned out, we didn't have to go. So I ended up in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, serving as I was an occupational counselor. And then And here I was, still just a 20-year-old kid, I guess, fresh from the European theater, along with thousands upon thousands of other men who were being discharged. I was not ready for discharge, didn't have enough points, but thousands of men were coming home who had, and I don't even recall how many points you had to have back in those days, but your service was based on some sort of a point system, how long you've been in, what your rank was, and all that sort of thing. Here I was a 20-year-old kid trying to convince as many of these men to sign up again as I possibly could, and convince them that the military service was something they could utilize. If they determined that they were going to be discharged and go home, what are you going to do with what you've done in the service? What kind of occupation did you do? Were you a truck driver? Well, maybe you ought to be a truck driver when you go home. Or were you a mechanic of some kind? Or maybe you may make a good policeman. So I would have to interview a lot of these men who were old enough to be my father, and then try to convince them to either re-sign up, or else to take on some job that was familiar to them that they could do well because of their military service.
Would you help connect them with the job, or just suggest a career line?
Just suggesting a career line, as you say. And then later on, I became a separation counselor, a classification specialist. And that really was the risk. This was when we were taking in young men in the service, and it's my job to try to help determine what they'd be best for in the service itself. If he was a truck driver, and
so the reverse.
Really in life, maybe he ought to be a truck driver in the service. Or if he'd been a dental technician somewhere for a period of time, maybe he could be in the medical corps. And all that sort of stuff. So I didn't feel like I was qualified to do any of that. I was so young and inexperienced myself. And so it probably, although I was transferred, I think I mentioned to you personally earlier, transferred to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to attend the Adjutant General School there, where my father had been in World War I as a medical, not an officer, but as a medical technician or something of that sort, and where he had met my mother, who then became the head nurse and administrator of the small hospital there in our hometown, Dant, Virginia. So I later discovered that we had been in the same place. My brother John, my older brother, who is now 93, has become one of the foremost authorities in the world on ultra-high voltage transmission, working for General Electric for many, many years, for his whole career, and even having done much of the original lightning research for GE up in the mast at the very top of the Empire State Building in New York City. He had been in the South Pacific as an electrical engineer, graduate of the Virginia Polytechnic Institute, or VPI, in electrical engineering, and so he made quite a name for himself. And even at age 93, he still does consulting all around the world.
Wow.
Yeah, with major electrical companies and so forth.
So, but what about you? After you were discharged, did you go back to pharmacy school?
Almost immediately. And I applied for readmission. Probably within a week after discharge. It wouldn't have been much longer than that, I don't think, that I recall. And so they greeted me back at school, and I was told that if I could go back and complete the third quarter of my third year, and just to redo that again, and I could be admitted back into the fourth year class, the class of 1947. And so I did that and graduated in 1947.
Did the Army help pay for that at all?
And the GI Bill, yeah. Thank God for the GI Bill. All of us who went through any of that could do just about anything on the GI Bill that we wanted to do, but I wanted to graduate in pharmacy and become a pharmacist. And I've had 60 plus years of a great career in hospital pharmacy. I had very little activity in what we would refer to as community pharmacy or the usual drugstore type arrangement. It's all been in hospital pharmacy, where I think I have, well, we were one of the leading, actually, I started I worked at the MCV hospital as a staff pharmacist there for about 3 years after graduation. And then I went to the University of Minnesota for some graduate work. Couldn't stand it because of the cold up there in the wintertime. I just could not take it. And so I worked about less than a year with a friend in a drugstore in Alexandria, Virginia, and then managed to get back to the Medical College of Virginia for another year or so. And then I opened the first small hospital in Virginia, completed on the with the Hill-Burton Act of that era. And I opened the King's Daughters Hospital in Stanton, Virginia, and also became the president of the Virginia Society of Hospital Pharmacists, and then was there for 9 years to the Ohio State University Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, as assistant director of the pharmacy department, and subsequently I came back to Waynesboro, where we loved the Valley of Virginia and wanted to get back to the mountains from the valley, and left Columbus, which was probably a huge professional mistake, but eventually turned out to be the best thing I could have done. And I was eventually elected president of the American Society of Hospital Pharmacists, which was the biggest professional organization in the world, I think, at the time, of about 30,000 members. And then eventually back to Waynesboro Community Hospital, where I had no help at all and had to create everything from start to finish. And we did some significant things at Waynesboro, which I believe sort of led the state in many areas of new ideas and things that I had learned from other people. None of which has anything to do with military service, of course.
Well, sounds like a very fulfilling career.
It has been.
Really enjoyed it. We're about to conclude the interview, so I just want to finish with some overarching questions about your service. Do you think your years in the service were valuable to you and helped shape the man you became?
Well, it's kind of hard to say, really, because nothing that I did in the service really applied to my career, which turned out to be, I think, a fairly successful one, although I've never made a lot of money in hospital pharmacy. You just don't make it there. But I had a wonderful career that exposed me to so many opportunities and people and friendships that I developed over the years with hundreds and hundreds of some of the leaders in my profession. And I really would have difficulty in saying what I did had any great influence on my profession. Now, had I been counseling like I was for so many people at the time on what I should have done, I probably should have convinced myself to sign up and belong to the reserves and follow that career and end up being a lieutenant colonel or maybe a major general or something like that, which would have paid off for me and much better than my career has, I think. That's all the travel you would have gotten. I think that's what I would have probably advised me to do at that time if I...
Were you happy you went down the route you went?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And then my final question, because this interview will be up in the Library of Congress and maybe viewed by Americans in the future, is there just a message you'd like to leave behind?
Serve your country. Believe in your country. Promote your country. Do everything that you can to lead your country or your people, your friends and others to support your country. So I think that's what little service I had, about 2 years, really did for me. And it has definitely increased my love for America and the realization that we are a separate and different kind of people than so much of the rest of the world. And that's not being haughty or self-supporting necessarily, but just the fact that we need to continue to support democracy as epitomized by the American experience. We're facing so many challenges today from every corner, but we are special, we are different, and we need to maintain that in order to continue to lead the world the way we have been. And there's so much of what's going on today that truly bothers and worries me, that we're losing that sense of community, of strength and understanding of each other and other people, other races, and other causes, but we still have to become one country and not a country of different people.
Well, thank you, Mr. Anderson, for allowing me into your home, allowing me to conduct this interview. I also want to thank you for your service to our nation through the armed forces, and also your service to the state of Virginia with all of your work with the medical field. So thank you so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I've appreciated having you, and I still don't know that my service-connected work was of any great significance, but I guess I was just one of another team, and not once did I ever raise my my M1 or my carbine or my burp gun in an offensive manner. I would have killed had it been necessary. No question about that. I don't think I would have had any qualms about that if I had been in a situation where it was either me or him. I would not have hesitated, but I didn't have to do that, and I'm so glad that I never killed anybody in the process. It would have been something that I couldn't really live with any kind of pleasure at all to have done that. And I can remember lots and lots of dead bodies, but none that I put on the ground at all with my weapon. And I'm so glad that I can say that as a Christian I never did kill anybody.
I'm happy you can say that as well. Well, again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
My
and for
pleasure.
your service.
My pleasure. I thank you for all the